Hello everyone. In this video lecture, this is the second part of body temperature regulation. We are going to understand the role of hypothalamus and study about the applied aspect of body temperature regulation. So the mechanism of temperature regulation is in the body is a reflex mechanism. That means the regulation of temperature is completely controlled by a reflex mechanism. For that reflex mechanism to work, there should be a reflex arc, which is made up of the stimulus, the receptor, the afferent, the integrating center, the efferent, the effector organs, and the effect. Let us see how these what are the receptors, what are the integrating centers, and what are the effectors in case of temperature regulation, and how they make the reflex arc. First of all, we'll understand that anterior hypothalamus and mainly the preoptic area of anterior hypothalamus plays a role in thermostatic detection of temperature. Then we'll see the detection of temperature over the body also with the help of skin and deep body receptors. These are the temperature receptors which are present over the skin and over the deep body. Then from there the signal comes through afferent and it gets integrated. Where it gets integrated? Into the posterior hypothalamus. So the posterior hypothalamus is the integratory center from where the effector signals comes or the motor signal comes. So this posterior hypothalamus then sends the effector signal to the effector mechanisms that decreases or increases the body temperature. That we have already studied those mechanisms in the first class. We will also have a look at those mechanisms again to see how those neuronal effector mechanisms increase or decreases the body temperature. Anterior hypothalamus, as I have said, acts inside the brain as a heat sensitive area. Okay, so anterior hypothalamus, especially the preoptic area, contains large number of heat sensitive neurons, as well as 1/3 of its neurons are cold sensitive neurons. So this is the area of the hypothalamus which has the receptors for heat, and these senses the body temperature, the core body temperature, and sends the signal to the integrator area of the hypothalamus, which is located in the posterior hypothalamus. As you can see here, hypothalamus, we were discussing in the autonomic system that it is also called as the head ganglion. So hypothalamus, as you can see, it has so many centers: feeding center, water balance center, heat control center, what we are discussing in the posterior hypothalamus. So this hypothalamus is a very important, or the head ganglion, for the control of autonomic nervous system. From there, what happens is the descending neurons comes and goes to the spinal cord, and from those neurons are supplied to the spinal cord origin of autonomic nervous system. Let us say the sympathetic nervous system, which is originating from the thoracolumbar system. Those thoracolumbar segments, as we had seen, that they originate from the intermediolateral horn of the thoracolumbar segments. This hypothalamic neuron, heat control neuron, would send a descending neuron to supply those intermediolateral horn to stimulate those neurons, and then the effector or the signal goes through those thoracolumbar segment and stimulates the end organs. Now coming to the receptors in skin and deep body tissues. So majorly the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area is contributing for the temperature sensation, but additional role for the sensation is played by skin and deep body tissues. Skin has more cold receptors than warmth receptors. Even in case of deep body temperature receptors which are found in case of in spinal cord, in abdominal viscera, and in the great veins, around the great veins in the upper abdomen and thorax. These receptors mainly consist of the cold receptors. That means the skin and deep receptors are concerned with preventing hypothermia. Since they are the cold receptors, they sense hypothermia, and their major role is to prevent the hypothermia. Now coming to the integratory center. Posterior hypothalamus acts as the integratory center. The signals from preoptic area as well as the signals from the body, like the skin and the deeper tissues, comes to the integratory center, and from this integrating center the analysis of those sensation, and then it gives out the efferents to the heat controlling mechanism, either by producing heat or by conserving heat conserving reactions of the body. So if there is occurring hypothermia in the body, the posterior hypothalamus will analyze it from the signals coming from the skin, deep tissues, and from anterior hypothalamus, and then it will send the effector or the efferent signals to the effector organs to produce or to prevent hypothermia and to increase the heat generation in the body. On the other hand, if hyperthermia, if the temperature in the body is rising, the sensation will come through anterior hypothalamus majorly, and very less from the skin and deep tissues, and this will be then analyzed in the posterior hypothalamus, and the posterior hypothalamus will send the efferents to the effector organ to increase the heat loss mechanisms so that the body temperature can come down. So that is how the posterior hypothalamus, which sends the effector, the efferent neurons to the spinal cord, so that the spinal autonomic neurons can then be stimulated, which are supplying the effector organs and cause the desired outcome. So what are the neuronal effector mechanisms? We have already studied in detail in the last class. There are certain mechanisms for increasing the body temperature, and there are certain mechanisms for decreasing the body temperature. So as we can see, for increasing the body temperature, there is first is skin vasoconstriction throughout the body. This is done by the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. As the body temperature goes down into the hypothermia, to prevent the heat loss through skin, there occurs vasoconstriction. This restricts the blood flow to the skin, which is a heat radiating part of our body, and thus by the help of vasoconstriction the temperature is maintained, or the heat which is produced in the body is preserved inside the body. Second mechanism, which is less important in human beings but more important in animal, is piloerection, that is the standing on end of the hair follicles. Okay, so there is erector pili muscle on the hair follicle which contracts and makes the hair erect. This is important, and it is also a sympathetic autonomic function. It is important in case of animals because it forms a thick air insulator layer around the body of the animals, which prevent the heat loss. Then the third mechanism is increase in thermogenesis. That means by the help of chemical mediators, let it be the epinephrine and norepinephrine, let it be thyroxine, let it be exercise or any other thermogenic mechanism, there occurs an increase in the thermogenesis inside the body to increase the body temperature. Then comes the hypothalamic stimulation of shivering. There occurs a shivering area, motor area, in the posterior hypothalamus. In the posterior hypothalamus, there is located a shivering motor area. When that is stimulated, it causes shivering in our body. When the body temperature goes down, this shivering motor area gets stimulated and causes increase in the muscle tone. What is shivering? What is the mechanism of shivering? Is it increases the muscle tone. It does not causes the contraction of the muscle as a whole, but the irregular contraction of certain fibers which cause a increase in the muscle tone, but it highly increases the heat production of the body. So that is shivering. It causes what? Irregular contraction of muscle which does not creates a movement or a powerful contraction, but rather increases the muscle tone and causes the 3 to 4 fold increase in body temperature. Then comes the sympathetic chemical excitation of heat production, that is with the help of epinephrine and norepinephrine, and with the help of sympathetic nerve supply there occurs the excitation of heat production. In this case, the uncoupling reaction take place. What is uncoupling reaction? Is instead of utilizing the carbohydrate as the energy production source, the uncoupling mechanisms turns the mitochondria into the heat production source. Instead of ATP, more and more heat is generated. Okay, so in case of any metabolites, if the carbohydrate is utilized, instead of ATP generation, uncoupling reaction promotes heat generation. So that is how the uncoupling reaction takes place. This occurs with the help of both epinephrine, norepinephrine, and also in case of thyroxine. So the thyroxine also, the increased thyroxine output also increases the uncoupling reaction and then causes increase in body temperature. Certain people who are living in the colder environment for a long term, the population who are living in the colder environment are more susceptible to have toxic goiter, because the thyroxine hormone is responsible to maintain higher temperature, and because of that more functioning of the thyroid gland, there are more incidents or more susceptibility to have toxic thyroid goiter in case of people who are residing in the cold environment. Now coming to the temperature decreasing mechanisms. Again, vasodilation of the skin blood vessels is the important mechanism. In that case, what happens is when the body temperature is increasing, to lose the heat, the blood vessels to the skin are dilated and more blood flows to the skin and causes the heat loss from the skin. The second and very important mechanism is sweating, as we have studied in the last class. Sweating mechanism promotes the heat loss by evaporation, and it is the major mechanism for heat loss during the summer or during the environmental temperature is higher. Then comes the decrease in heat production. So as we have studied all these thermogenic effects, in case of muscle stimulation, in case of uncoupling reaction, all these thermogenic effects are decreased and there is a decreased heat production in the body to bring down the temperature, the body temperature. Now coming to the very important concept in temperature regulation is the set point. Set point temperature is a temperature which is set in the posterior hypothalamus, and once the set point temperature is fixed, the body tries to get the temperature back to this normal. If there is any fluctuation in the temperature, let us say in our normal body the set point temperature is 37.1 degrees Celsius or 98.8 degrees Fahrenheit. In case of that, if there is hypothermia, let us say the body temperature comes to 36.8 degrees Celsius, our body's mechanism, as you can see here in the diagram, if the set point is 37.1 degrees Celsius and it goes towards 36.8, the heat production mechanism kicks in and tries to get back the body temperature to the normal set point temperature. This set point temperature is very important, as this can be varied in certain physiological conditions or in pathological conditions. As we will see in case of fevers, this set point are raised higher to 101 degree Fahrenheit or above, and that is how then the body responds to the increased set point and tries to set the body temperature to a higher level. So that is how the set point works. And on the other hand, if you can see, if the body temperature increases above the set point, the heat loss mechanism kicks in, and all the heat loss mechanisms tries to bring back the body temperature back to the set point level. This feedback gain, this is a feedback mechanism, and every feedback mechanism has a gain, and this gain for the body temperature regulation is extremely high. That means the body mechanism, feedback mechanism of body temperature is highly effective, and that is how our body temperature is regulated normally within 1 degree Fahrenheit. Coming to the physiological changes, skin temperature has a capability that it can alter the set point for the core temperature control. Let us see in this diagram that we are having two conditions. Okay, we'll study these two diagrams differently. So let us see in the first diagram. What is happening here is, these are the skin temperatures, and corresponding to the skin temperature, these are the set point levels. So in case of 33 to 39 degrees Celsius, this is the set point for the body. As the skin temperature is decreasing, as you can see here, the skin temperature is decreasing, the set point temperature is increasing, because if the environmental temperature is decreasing and the skin temperature is decreasing, the set point temperature will go to the higher temperature, so to keep the body in its warm condition, so to maintain the internal body temperature. What will happen if the set point temperature is going to the higher levels? As the body temperature, as the skin temperature is decreasing because of the decrease in the environmental temperature, the body set point temperature is increasing. This increase in the set point temperature will first avoid the sweating. As in case of sweating, you can see at 33 to 39 degrees Celsius, the sweating is very low in case of 29 degrees Celsius. So this will prevent the heat loss mechanism, and it will cause the more effective heat gain mechanism. As we can see in the next diagram here, as the environmental temperature increases, as the environmental temperature increases, what is happening? The set point is going towards the lower levels. That means to keep the body cooler, because as the environmental temperature increase, the skin temperature will also increase, and the body will become hot. The body will become warmer and more warmer. In that case, what is going to happen? The set point temperature is going to slide towards a lower temperature. So to keep the shivering down and to avoid extra thermogenesis and to gain and to start more heat loss mechanisms, so to keep the body temperature lower. So as you can see in the both diagrams, these are favoring the skin temperature is one of the sensory mechanisms which favors the regulation of core body temperature, and this has the capacity to alter the set point towards the more favorable temperature, so that the body temperature can be regulated. In case of decrease in the skin temperature, the set point goes towards higher level of body temperature, so that the body heat can be preserved in case of hypothermia. In case of increase in the heat temperature, increase in the heat, increase in the skin temperature, the body goes towards the lesser temperature so that heat loss mechanism can increase, heat production mechanism decreases, and keeps the body in a lesser temperature, or even though the environmental temperature is increasing, the body can be in a normal temperature. So the set point keeps on decreasing so that the body temperature decreases according to the environmental increase in the environmental temperature. So the opposing forces are working to keep the body temperature in the normal levels. Apart from the autonomic control of body temperature regulation, there is a one more very effective system to control the body temperature, that is called the behavioral control. What is behavioral control? Is person makes appropriate environmental changes like his clothing, like his eating habits, like the things like air conditioners, coolers, fans. In case of summer, the choices will be towards the heat loss mechanism, which uh, adds to the heat loss mechanism, whereas in case of winter season it will be towards the heat gain mechanism. So this behavioral control by the psychic stimulation, that means when the temperature stimulation comes to the sensation of the individual, he prefers a certain type of changes, behavioral changes, which then adds to the temperature regulation of the body. And scientists consider by far that this is the most effective mechanism to control the body temperature, even more powerful than the autonomic nervous system in case of severely cold environments. Now, coming to the abnormalities of body temperature regulation, we will study the fever, heat stroke, and exposure of the body to extreme cold. So, coming to the fever, what is fever? It is abnormal rise in body temperature. So, if there is hyperthermia, abnormal rise in the body temperature, it is called as fever. What are the causes of the fevers? Abnormalities in the brain is one cause, like compression of the hypothalamus by certain kind of tumors can be one cause of fever. And the very most important cause is by the toxic substance that affects the temperature regulating center. That means the toxic substances which are released from bacterial cell walls, the lipopolysaccharides, and the substances, the protein degradation substances which are released from the degrading tissues of the body. These toxic substances acts on the temperature regulating center present in the posterior hypothalamus and causes the fever. Let us understand with the help of this diagram how the fever is caused. So this blue lines will determine the setting of thermostat, and the red line will tell us about the actual body temperature. As you can see in the starting, this is the time and this is the body temperature. As you can see, once by any cause, let us say by the compression of brain with the help of tumor or hemorrhage or any other cause, or by the toxic substances like lipopolysaccharides of bacterial toxins, or from the degradation products of the tissues, what happens is at first the set point temperature suddenly rises to a higher value. Previously it was at 98.8 degrees Celsius, and suddenly the set point temperature changes because of those toxins to 103 degrees Fahrenheit. From here, what is going to happen is, since the set point has changed, now the body will try to elevate the temperature to the set point level. The body will try to elevate the body temperature to the set point level with the help of mechanisms called chills. This is the mechanisms of increasing the body temperature. Vasoconstriction, which prevents the heat loss and does not allow the blood flow to the skin, piloerection, epinephrine secretion, and shivering. All these mechanisms will give rise to a feeling or a sensation or a mechanism that is called chills. Chills also means that the patient will feel cool at that time. If the set time temperature is raised to a higher level and the body temperature is lesser, the patient will feel cool, and at that time all the mechanisms to regain the body temperature will set on, and as you can see, shivering, which are the mechanisms of heating during cooler environment, epinephrine secretion, vasoconstriction, all of them helps the body temperature to come back to the set point level. As we can see here, the set point is set at a higher value. So during this period, the patient will be feeling cool even though his body temperature is normal or above normal, until the body temperature comes to the set point level. Once the body temperature comes to the set point level, the feeling of that cold sensation will not be there, and he will feel as if he is in a normal body temperature. Then comes the crisis. This is the point called crisis. What happens in crisis is when the effect of these toxins comes down, the set point level suddenly reduces to the low value or to the basal value. When the toxins are removed or their actions are destroyed, the set point suddenly reduces to a lower value. At that time, the sensation or the mechanism which start is called crisis. In this mechanism, vasodilation and sweating will take place, which will increase the heat loss from the body, causing the body temperature to come down. This is called crisis. Understanding the mechanism of fever is very important, because fever is one of the very important aspect of our clinical practice. So the any substance what we discuss, the bacterial toxins or the degradation products of the body tissues which causes fever is called as pyrogens. The mechanism of action of pyrogens in causing fever includes the role of cytokines. As we have seen in our immunity classes, that the cytokines are wide variety of chemical mediators which are released during inflammatory responses and give signals to the various body parts. One of the most important cytokine which is involved in pyrogenesis is interleukin 1, and this is also called as endogenous pyrogen. This interleukin 1 acts on the hypothalamus, posterior hypothalamus temperature regulation center by formation of the prostaglandin, mainly prostaglandin E2. There are certain substances which can work directly on the hypothalamus, and there are other substances which acts indirectly by formation of prostaglandin E2. There comes the role of the drugs which can alter this. Aspirin impedes, or other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs can impede the formation of these prostaglandins from arachidonic acid. There is breakdown of arachidonic acids which with the help of cyclooxygenase enzymes forms prostaglandins, and this aspirin acts as an inhibitor of cyclooxygenase enzymes and cause or impedes the formation of prostaglandins from arachidonic acids. That is why drugs such as aspirin reduces fever and are called as antipyretic drugs. Now coming to heat stroke. Heat stroke usually occurs when a person is exposed to a higher environmental temperature for a long time. Let us say the effect of this air temperature which one person can stand depends to a greater extent on whether the air is dry or wet. That means the humidity of the air. If the humidity is 100%, the capability to withstand the higher temperature decreases because it does not allow the sweats to evaporate. Whereas if the humidity is less, if the air is dry, the ability to withstand the higher temperature increases because it readily allows the sweat to evaporate. In heat stroke, body temperature rises beyond the critical temperature into the range of 105 degrees Fahrenheit to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. The symptoms of heat stroke include dizziness, abdominal distress, sometimes accompanied by vomiting, delirium, that is mental confusion, and eventually loss of consciousness occurs. This can be accompanied by circulatory shock. Because of sweating, there can be excessive loss of salt and water and can be accompanied by circulatory shock. So the treatment should include the first of all the decrease of the body temperature and then the replenishment of the body fluids. Decrease in the body temperature can be done by sprinkling the water or by tepid sponging. Previously, the ice bath was preferred, but then the mechanism can itself cause shivering and can cause body heat generation. That is why tepid sponging and spraying of the water is preferable. The most of the pathogenesis of heat stroke or the death is caused by local hemorrhages and parenchymatous degeneration of the cell throughout the entire body, but especially these hemorrhages and degeneration occurs in brain which causes the fatal damage. Acclimatization to the heat helps to withstand the the higher environmental temperature. As we have seen in the last class, acclimatization allows higher sweat production, lesser loss of electrolytes, and also causes the plasma volume to increase. These all acclimatization occurs when the person is exposed gradually to the heat, and it allows a person to stand a higher temperature, environmental temperature. Exposure of the body to extreme cold. So the body temperature, if it falls below 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the ability of hypothalamus to regulate temperature is completely lost. This effect can be seen if the body temperature, if this effect starts if the body temperature falls below 94 degrees Fahrenheit. There occurs the loss of ability of hypothalamus to regulate the body temperature. But usually the body temperature, the human beings does not allow the body temperature to fall below these level except in extreme conditions. As we have already seen, the behavioral mechanism is one of the best mechanism to prevent that fall of the body temperature to these levels. Coming to the frostbite. What is the pathogenesis? Ice crystals are formed inside the cells which cause permanent damage, and such permanent damage consists of circulatory impairment and local tissue damage. Once this area is thawed, once this area comes back to the normal temperature, it usually develops into gangrene, and frostbite areas must be removed surgically. These are the applied aspects of temperature regulation, and among these, fever is one of the most important to understand because you will come to see the cases, to see the patients of fever regularly in your clinical practice. Very important to understand the body temperature regulation and understand the fever mechanism and how the drugs can affect or control the fever. Thank you so much.